Hello, and thanks for joining us on Encore. Coming up on the show. My guest today tells tremendous and epic stories without a word passing his lips. Choreographer and dancer Akram Khan has mesmerised audiences with performances that combine movement, visual art and sound, and taking inspiration from everything from flamenco to traditional Indian Kathak dance. His latest production, Until the Lions, revisits a legendary saga, and he's in the studio to tell us more. Akram Khan, thanks so much for joining us today in the studio.
Thank you.
Now, you're in Paris with a performance you created called Until the Lions. Now, the central character is Amber, a princess who's kidnapped, and then she becomes an outcast. This sounds like she would be a victim, but you've made her into a sort of warrior figure. How was that?
Yeah, well, it's the character comes from the Mahabharata, and it's a collection of poems written by Kartika Nair that kind of inspired me to kind of investigate Amber. So she wrote very specific poems inspired by female characters, and one of them was Amber. But what I found interesting about Amber was the gender crossover. So it starts off with her as a woman who is abducted, who is then thrown into the wolves, if you like, by a great warrior called Bhishma, who says, well, you're going to marry my nephew and blah, blah, blah. And then eventually nobody wants to marry her because they're afraid that she belongs to actually Bhishma and the complexities of that. And she says, you marry me. And he says, no, because I've taken a vow of celibacy. So there's a complexity in him and there's a complexity in her. And I just found it fascinating reading Kartika Nair's, who's the poet, her poems, and then being inspired. And I've always been connected to Mahabharata as a child because of having the great fortune of working with Peter Brook when I was 14. So.
Okay, well, let's take a look at that show. This is an extract from Until the Lions.
I painted gods and monarchs time and time again. Through the months, the years, I prowled this planet. It is time then, time for the gods and demons to concede one last boon. Time to redeem, time to reclaim your end, and time that I may rend this unloved, unending instant. The lives, lifetimes we lost, unspent, for it is time.
Now, you mentioned this exploration of gender, how men and women interact, but also how they use their bodies in the dance. Sometimes that's quite a violent dynamic. What did you want to explore there?
Well, I think transformation or shift between gender is always a violent one. Change is violent, I think. We're not used to it. We, as a kind of species, we like to be comfortable with what we know, not what we don't know. But in this particular instance, what's interesting I find with mythology is that sometimes the female characters in certain mythologies are not celebrated equally as male characters. And I always found that troubling because I find the female characters far more complex and far more fascinating. So when Kartika approached me, the poet approached me with this to kind of proposed me to do this piece, I was so fascinated by Amber because there is a real shift between a female where she has to kill herself and then she's reborn as a new being, as a girl, and then slowly transforms, and eventually at the end she transforms completely into a man to be able to have the opportunity to fight in a battle. So there's a lot, it's kind of in a way a kind of a feminist piece, really.
I think so.
Yeah, it's really seeing it through the eyes of Amber.
Now, the title of the piece, Until the Lions, is inspired by this proverb that basically says, until the lions have their say, we'll only know the story from the hunter's point of view, that the victors write history, basically. Who would you say are the voiceless in modern society if we transpose that metaphor?
I think the majority of people are voiceless right now in the world that we live in. and there's a very specific minority that control everything, but the majority of people don't have a voice. They're not allowed a voice, and it's becoming ever so frustrating. I think that's why the world is kind of in such a chaotic place, because there is a real shift of. There always has been, but it's even more dangerous and extreme now, where the people that the voice of the many are kind of stamped out.
You mentioned working with director Peter Brook very early on in your career. What did you learn from this very renowned director?
It's hard to say in a few minutes what I learned from him. He's he's godfather of theatre, just as I feel Aryan Mushkin is the godmother of theatre. These two are kind of living legends. But there's something that I always feel very connected, that connects me now, even now, to my experience working with him 20 however many years ago, when I was a little boy. And that was he never seduced people. I felt he never seduced people with complexity. The complexity was in its simplicity. And so he always went to the essence, to the heart of the narrative. And I've always kind of tried to follow that. It's always been, as a child, when you're so young, working with such a gigantic figure, of course, even subconsciously, they're chiseling away at you and shaping your thinking, even though he wasn't directly working with me. I was quite a nuisance as a child. I was very naughty and distracted by many other things, except when I was on stage. But there's something very his way of thinking kind of seeped into my way of thinking, really.
Well, in your career, you've collaborated with artists from other disciplines, not just dance. Anish Kapoor, Nitin Sawhney, and of course, actress Juliette Binoche, very well known here in France. Let's hear from Juliette on the project that you worked together on.
In fact, painting is dancing on paper. It's got to dance and move. It's the same thing. It comes from the same place, just expressed differently.
And so what strikes you most when working with people who are not from a dance background?
With the actors that I've worked with, there's something very daring, because sometimes information, when you're trained in a certain thing, information can get in the way. So knowledge can sometimes get in the way of you, because you suddenly become very aware of what is right and what is wrong. And somehow it's like a child, somebody who doesn't have the information is like a child who's more instinctive and instinctual. And that's far more exciting sometimes, where the knowledge, the training can be had slowly, but the instinct should never that thing of wanting to dive into something, not knowing if they're going to fail or succeed or look like a fool, is far more exciting. And I think that's something that always attracts me to an artist.
Now, dance is a medium that relies on non-verbal communication. There's no language that happens here, and you tell the story with your body. How much can you tell about people by the way they use their bodies?
I always feel that the body speaks the truth. Words don't. Somehow, not always anyway. Words are in a way to hide what the truth is. So I've always been fascinated by studying the body, but also a funny story is my mother's father is a genius mathematician, 2 times gold medalist in mathematics, and somehow my mother didn't get that gift. She became a literature expert, and so the whole of Bangladesh, my parents are from Bangladesh, and the whole of Bangladesh, or the majority of mathematician or the academic world, thought I would have it. And I didn't. I failed mathematics badly, at university and at college, and that's when they said, oh yeah, he doesn't have a gift. But what was interesting was I became fascinated by physical patterns, because I thought maybe I was a genius. Because if people around you are calling you genius as a child, you must think you are. Or I did anyway. And so I started to investigate people's way of moving and started to codify it. The way you moved, I would give it a number. Your height, I would give it a number. Your voice, the tone of your voice, I would give it a number. So it would be between 1 and 10 always. So there was a point in my childhood where I got so good at it that I could see someone walk by and be talking on the phone, and I'd be going, "That's an 8913 4443."
It's a language.
Like a phone number. Yeah, but called crazy. Another
maybe
form of
it's
craziness.
Artistic genius.
No,
Now,
not-
just
not at
briefly,
all.
I heard that you had to stop dancing a few years back briefly because you snapped your Achilles tendon. It's a very metaphorical, very figurative kind of injury. That's all healed up now. But what would you say that more figuratively, what's your weakness, your Achilles heel?
Your strength is your weakness. Your weakness is your strength. They go hand in hand sometimes. I think my Achilles heel would be my daughter.
Really?
Yeah, she's 3.
Well,
And she has
makes
me
sense.
around her little finger.
That's a nice one to have. Akram Khan, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
We'll leave you with a clip from Akram's creation, Desh. That's on stage here in Paris at the Théâtre des Abbesses at the end of the month. Remember to check out our website. You can also keep up with Encore on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. There's more news coming up on France 24 after this.